actually, we are running late, so we'll have a few questions as well as, the issues which have been raised. We'll discuss those as well. So please, may I? Okay, Chris, please. Thank you. Okay, so this is, all these issues we have covered this morning, they have thrown a lot of challenges. The challenges about how social media, how the issue of trust, how the news changes are creating more problems than resolving in many cases. I mean, India is one example where social media is being used to organize violence. There have been lynchings in India which were organized by people with some vested interest. It was done on WhatsApp, it was done on Twitter. WhatsApp is the main issue. Chris Morris is BBC's veteran correspondent. He has been BBC's South Asia correspondent. He has been correspondent in Washington, in Colombo, in Brussels, and he's now reality TV correspondent. Brussels, he has been, BBC's Europe correspondent for a long time, and he has covered Brexit. Most people who are in this room must have seen his reports. So, Chris, may I start with you about this problem of fake news?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't mind addressing the term fake news, because I really don't like it. It was, if not originating from, certainly popularized by Donald Trump. And if we're going to take the current president of the United States as the basis for our factual discourse, I think we're going to run into problems. So I think we need to recognize that it is something that has been around for a long time. It's misinformation, it's casual disregard of the facts, and that's probably been around since medieval jousters went around from town to town singing the praises of the local king. I mean, I remember back in 1990, I was in Ayodhya, talking about India, at the end of L.K. Advani's Rath Yatra. And there were rumours flooding around. There was rioting in all sorts of parts of UP. This town was exploding, that town was about to blow up into violence. Just imagine what could have happened then if the Kar Sevaks who were flooding into Ayodhya had WhatsApp or other forms of social media. So what we're talking about is not a new development. What's new is the technology which enables it to move faster and travel further and have a bigger impact. One person sitting in his or her back bedroom can, in certain circumstances, affect the whole world. And that's what's changed. I don't think the idea that there are people who are trying to manipulate us is suddenly new. It's the ability to spread it far and wide very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Now, one person who is missing, and you may be wondering what happened to him, is Ashish Joshi. Ashish Joshi is a Sky News health correspondent, and he has been pulled out because of the coronavirus. But we have still have Marcella Canova with us. Marcella is editor of journalism.co.uk, and she has been following the trends in not just social media, but across the media divide. So tell us, Marcella, in your opinion, how has things changed for the worse, if you like, over the last few years?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So in regards to social media and misinformation?
Yes.
Right. I'd say there are sort of three broad categories how social media are used for misinformation when it comes to journalists. And I've divided very broadly into new ways to intimidate journalists to try to silence them, new ways to discredit journalists, to invite public not to trust them as providers of news, but also feeding journalists misinformation and rely on them to amplify misinformation. It's a useful idiot, if you will. I think as you say, the virality is the biggest challenge. And also I think the very difficult dilemma of every journalist is do we need to debunk every false story? Where to stop? When a story becomes so important, we need to, get on it. So, for example, when it's something like, say, public health issue, it's relatively no-brainer. When there is a doctored video of, ducks crossing the pedestrian crossing in Germany that was doctored, it was cute, and everyone thought ducks were crossing pedestrian crossing. Do we as journalists, should we report that, oh, it's fake? Will the fact that we don't report it then discredit us for the future when people say, oh, well, you didn't even spot that one and you featured on your website, so why should I trust you now when you say this or that video is doctored? So I think with journalists, the problem is lack of time, lack of resources, but I also just see in many organizations just much more relaxed approach to fact-checking. It's like getting there first. It's almost most important as verified information, and it's so tough because you get a scoop, and now you have to decide, or I get a scoop and I tell the story and it's probably true, or I'm actually risking to mislead the public if I tell it. But if I wait, someone else will scoop me out, and maybe they will communicate it in a worse way, right? So it's the social media just accelerated the whole sort of news gathering process and news selling process. And I think that the fact checking kind of fell by the wayside, and that is the biggest challenge right now is does public really care about the truth? And I think we often talk about the post-truth era, and we see that sometimes getting a story or getting the story first or getting it viral or being on social, I don't want to say is more important than telling the truth, but sometimes we see the examples of that.
Okay, Francisco, how do you see this thing heading towards the social media, which is, do you think, is there any way we could control all the problems?
Well, I think controlling the all problems would be a bit too optimistic. I think what we should focus on the most is probably media literacy. So what I see missing terribly right now is like organizations working with students to understand the consequences of what using social media is, regarding news or not. And we weren't simply equipped enough to face this innovation probably. But this is true for probably every groundbreaking innovation that we faced in history. So I wouldn't be too scared. I'm kind of an optimistic, to be honest, just because I think when something is not sustainable within a system, the system tends to adapt, unless, well, there is also a not very bright option, but like that's life. I think, to be honest, that, for example, to follow up on what Marcela just said, part of the issue of should we debunk everything we see online, probably before focusing on debunking everything, we should focus on why are we publishing content that it's not really relevant and it doesn't add value to our readers. So, for example, I don't believe as a reader before than as a journalist, I don't believe that breaking news are important. I don't believe in a system that is based on breaking news. I don't believe that helps people understanding what goes on in the world. I'm not interested in breaking news. I know it might sound strange because I'm supposedly a journalist, but I simply believe that right now this is just creating noise, and not just background noise. This is creating first-line noise, the major noise, and people are not able to understand anymore. Yesterday, the BBC published an update saying that all public schools and universities in my country have been closed because of coronavirus. This happened to be true, but this happened to be true 4 hours after that, and that was just a relaunch of another news agency which just published something which wasn't true. and it was unfortunately the main press wire in newswire, sorry, in Italy. So very important institution, which just rushing through the day to get the story first, didn't really care about the reality. They didn't double check. They didn't wait for an official statement from the Ministry of Education. So I think this is not simply giving our readers a good enough service, and probably before being scared about social media, we should be scared about how much we run.
I just want to add one thing, sort of picking up on that, is how you establish, and one thing that Marcelo said as well about, I think one thing we learned from this election, sadly, is that a lot of people in this country didn't seem to mind that they weren't being told the truth. A lot of voters didn't seem to mind, and that's something we have to take on board, not just in this country, but around the world. But I think one thing we've got to think really carefully about as journalists is how do we establish a baseline of facts? If we are talking about alternative facts, that nothing's true, that everything can be questioned, how do we establish a sort of a basis of fact? And one of the things we're really lucky about in this country, which you can't always take for granted everywhere, is that we have institutions like the Office for National Statistics, like the Office for Budget Responsibility, who I think we still can go to as genuinely independent bodies who will say, here are the numbers behind a particular subject. And I've, in the last couple of years, doing the job I've been doing, particularly trying to sort of fact-check Brexit, I've discovered a new admiration for the people who understand statistics and numbers, because it's incredibly important. If we can't rely on the numbers which we use to create our journalism, then we're in real trouble. And we shouldn't necessarily take for granted that things like national statistics bodies won't become politicised. I think it is happening around the world. It obviously makes it much more difficult in an authoritarian society because you can't trust the statistics on which the journalism is based. And one of the things I found most troubling actually during the whole Brexit process was I suppose based on this idea from Michael Gove that this country's had enough of experts. But then, for example, when the Treasury produced economic analysis which showed that a no-deal Brexit would create a GDP loss over 15 years of 9%, a Canada-style deal would create a loss of about 4%, the debate became to attack the people who produced these statistics in the first place. In other words, undermining the basics, the statistical basis on which you can have an argument. And I do think for journalism now, it's really important that if there's any place we're going to sort of stand and fight, it's to make sure that we at least have some numbers that we can all agree on. Then, of course, as is right and proper, people have different political opinions about what those numbers mean and what you should do about it. That's absolutely right. There's always been spin, but I think one thing I really fear now is that people are trying to undermine the numerical basis on which we have those arguments in the first place.
Okay, let me invite the audience. Anyone wants to ask any questions, please, because we are running a little late. Vijay.
My question is mainly to Francesco. First of all, I'd like to say your presentation was very enjoyable and well understood by me. I just, in terms of social media you talked about, are you saying that your audience, you are satisfied with that your audiences are mainly young people, as you mentioned, or is there a battle engaging the older people like me of a certain generation? And I don't even go near some of the social sites that you showed. Is there a focus on older generation, or are you just focusing on the younger generation with social media? And also, you already talked about the negative effects and what happened on WhatsApp in terms of riots in India and how it aggravated the situation. So the negative effects of social media.
Okay, Francisco.
So first of all, regarding the focus on older audience, No, there is no specific focus on older audience on social media, mainly because there is a smaller penetration of older audiences on social media. So my job is mainly, not only, but mainly to understand how the newspaper I work for in the next few years will be still relevant for those people who don't buy the paper edition every day, or they are not used to accessing our journalism directly from the homepage of our site, because they probably just don't know who we are. So we can't afford anymore to take for granted that everyone knows the Telegraph, especially because we are an English speaking, not really me as you can imagine, but we as a newspaper are an English speaking newspaper and organization. So we have to battle on a worldwide stage. So it's not just about the UK audience. And to be fair, I recently found out that we have a massive audience in India, for example, on Facebook specifically. So it's a matter of being relevant for a very broad audience. And regarding the other thing you asked me about, the bad consequences of social media. So last year, after the revelations of Cambridge Analytica, I read a huge amount of articles from experts in the media industry saying that we should pull off from social media. We should just leave social media because we are feeding the beast. Well, let me tell you that unfortunately the beast feeds himself for a very large extent. So if we just leave social media, if we think that dropping official accounts of media publications would make a difference, that's absolutely ludicrous in my opinion, because people are there before we are there. And it's a matter of owning a space where people are and where people need us. For example, something that I often hear and listen is that TikTok is a controversial platform because it's owned by an autocracy. That's absolutely a considerate.
Which is China.
What, sorry?
TikTok is a Chinese company.
It's absolutely a considerate point of view. The problem is that if I'm not there, there is no one else who's talking to teenage in the US, in India, in the UK, in China, offering them a different view and different perspective on what's true and what's not and what's going on in the world. So I think I'm not saving the world, but I'm definitely contributing in making it into a better place.
Okay, thank you. Any?
Can I just quickly add one? I mean, just to say it's not just newspapers either. I mean, if you look at BBC Radio in this country, I don't have the exact figures with me, but I think Radio 3 and Radio 4, the average age of listeners is in the late 50s. Radio 2 and Radio 5 Live, it's in the late 40s. And even Radio 1, which I think that's the one for the kids, it's in the 30s. So how do you reach the audience between 16 and 30 who now have such an extraordinary choice of media in their hand, in their pocket every day? And if we don't persuade them that actually, and I think one thing Francesca said about education, I mean, surely how you navigate the news in your life should be part of the education, should be part of the curriculum in every education system in the world, because this is how, and it's only going to accelerate, how this is the world that kids are growing up in. They have to know how to be able to navigate it. Most of them do it pretty well, I think, but we need to know how to reach them with what we think is decent and interesting information.
Okay, hello.
Thank you. Any media, any technology, how you use it or misuse it. That's the two sides. And when we talk about you remember the riot in North London? How it happened? It happened WhatsApp and the Facebook, how the people were asked to come and they created the trouble. So it's nothing new. A few years it happened. Again, I'm a school governor as well. In our primary schools, we teach our children how to use the social media.
So what's the question?
My question is how to control the fake news, and because the journalists in the 24/7 news, they want to be the first. They don't check the fact, and they put the news.
Can I jump on this? I don't think you can control the fake news. To control the fake news, you should control people. And I wish we never get there. Because people can spread misinformation just quoting part of an headline. If I glance at a newspaper when I'm on the tube, a reliable newspaper, but I misread the headline, and then I quote it during a conversation, I'm spreading misinformation. No one can control this. So the point is not to control misinformation and disinformation. The point is to empower people with tools to do that, and hold platforms accountable for what they can do to avoid spreading of fake news and misinformation and disinformation, however you want to call it.
Marcela, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And, especially in India, where use of WhatsApp is so important for sharing news, there is a flip side of that. And there is also that once people are there, we as journalists need to go to same spaces where people are and use the tools that they use. There has been, for example, very good initiative from the Washington Post during the Indian election in 2019, where journalist, his name was Rick something. Anyway, he had the WhatsApp group where he was reporting on India election, and he invited people. It was like, send me a video if you have any doubt. Send me a claim if you have any doubt. I double check it for you, Average public has no means to check information, or very limited means to check information. And that's where I probably, I don't really agree with the whole media literacy thing. Yes, it's important, but you cannot rely on public to distinguish between true and false information. The general public has not got the skills. They will never have. They go about their own lives, have a million things to do. It's our job as media to up our game, and we have to provide the true information rather than rely on people doing it. So there is a cross-check in Nigerian election. There was initiative in Brazilian election, and this proved extremely popular. So when people receive their little, message on WhatsApp, I don't know, so-and-so is, rapist or whatever, they could have sent it to an independent group made of 30 or 50 international journalists who had no stake in that country or no affiliation with that or this or that media. And they could actually send that claim and say, is that true? And once it was verified, these claims were then stored. So if someone else we sent the same video, the same picture, the group was able to respond much quicker, saying, oh, we already double-checked that this is true or this is false. And, the move from public platform to private platform for news is a problem in journalism. I think it's much bigger than we think of it today. So people, rather than posting misinformation on their Facebook, will send it through a messenger. My mum would share, news with me through Messenger. She wouldn't post it on her Facebook either. I hope I will see it. She wants me to see it. So when people start to spread misinformation in a space where we as media cannot access, because by definition it's people's private sort of channels, that's where we need to create new tools, something that does not exist right now, where we actually help people in these spaces to double check what they see.
And as Francesco said, the platforms clearly have a responsibility. We all know who they are, the big media giants, the Facebooks and the Googles. And we spend a lot of time, as I'm sure all other media do, on what's called SEO, search engine optimization. How do you make sure your story appears at the top when somebody types a question into Google? And I do think the under considerable pressure, that those platforms are getting better at having discussions with companies like the BBC and others to work out how, if there are clearly false claims, that if you put that claim in, the things that emerge at the top of the search engine are going to be things like BBC Reality Check or Full Fact or other things. So hopefully we can direct people in the direction they want. But I agree is that it's like trying to put out a bushfire. Fires are always going to spring up. You can't rely on people to just simply sort of be able to understand what is right and wrong all the time, and that's why clearly the role of journalists, if anything, is more important than it was before, even though it's under threat more than before as well.
We have to move to another section now. So is there any one last question?
Very brief comment.
Yeah.
I think what you were saying, what the gentleman said here about the platform is most important. I've been a media lawyer for over 40 years, right? When there is libel, defamation, we know exactly where to zoom, right? Even in slander, which is very rare. But here, the perpetrators of false news, they get away with it because we have no legislative powers in this country or globally to control that. And we always get this answer, that the platform providers will try to resolve it, but they do nothing because it's income for them, not the respect and the privacy of the individual. Because the platform, the perpetrator can move from one to another. And there is no, because you can't sue the perpetrator, but the platform is the one, like in a libel, a publication, the printer of the book can also be sued. So this is what concerns me. Why aren't the governments taking an issue and legislating against this so that it protects the man in the street?
I think it is beginning to change a little bit. I do think under the threat of regulation from government, but also under public pressure from, you see the distaste in many ways with which people look at those big platforms.
Difference between regulation and legislation.
Well, I think we need to think very carefully about legislating on freedom of information, and that would be my concern.
So to reply very directly to your question, for about the past 3 years, I went to loads of conferences where Facebook were presenting, and I asked very directly, number of representatives, is Facebook ever going to accept their role as a publisher, right? And every time the answer was no, disguised in whatever else. Now, the problem is that it is private individuals who are publishers. We as journalists, we study media law, we understand our responsibility, and we do this job because we opted in. Lambda user of social media has never studied media law, they don't know what they're doing, and they don't have the responsibility, and in their minds, they are not publishers. And I think that the basic problem is that social media became something completely else than what was meant to be. When I joined Facebook, they were my friends, and we posted, pictures from holiday and our kittens. And social media used to be a place where you let your hair down and you made a tit of yourself, and there's literally the whole point of it. Now social media has to be a space where you safeguard the truth, you present your most professional self, you have to be careful not to say libel or slander or anything else. But they are not publishers, and they never be. So I think as much as we as journalists really want them to be publishers, they genuinely are not, and I do not believe we will ever arrive to that point. So we are trying to regulate the wrong thing, in my mind.
Thank you very much.